looks like Tani Oluwaseyi is heading to Spain from Minnesota United. And there were reports that a top half La Liga club were linked to him. Now it looks like it'll be around $7.5 million for his move to Villarreal, where he would join Tajon Buchanan. And that could be an intriguing transfer for a Canadian striker that has hit his stride in MLS over the last few years, but has a very defined playing style that I'm not sure translates over to La Liga, Brendan.
Yeah, I would agree with you. That's not my first thought, but roll the tape back, boys. Remember on the last show when we talked about the unnamed club, and I said, well, who qualifies as an unnamed club? Like if Villarreal are 6-9, like do they qualify? Boom, the Tajon effect. Everybody wants in on the Canadian party. I do think that he might end up in a situation in Spain similar to Kyle Larin, where he has a lot of tools, he can bring a lot to a team, but he doesn't necessarily fit into the system or the style that they're playing. Also in which we tend to see there's a lot of Spanish managers, and Villarreal maybe have a bit more stability than a Mallorca or a Valladolid, let's say. But managers come and go very, very quickly. And also they tinker and adapt to their opponent in ways that don't seem to use the full rotation of the squad the way that we see, say, the Canadian men's national team adjust their squad based on their opponent. And I feel as though he could be the odd man out. Also, too, in the fact that he has an excellent partnership right now in Minnesota, it could be difficult to replicate in any new scenario. So I'm a bit concerned about Spain, but that's also from traumas of other Canadian players who have gone over there and not done well. But I think he's deserving of a move to Europe, and it would be super intriguing, Alex, to have both Tajon and Tani together, of course.
Yeah, I'm happy that you guys are a bit apprehensive, not because, I think it's good because I'm actually not. And I think it offers a bit of a good perspective. I mean, Ben might have seen him the most this year in terms of just watching all these Minnesota games with Ben getting stuck in MLS. I've watched a fair few myself. I'm not too worried. You have to remember he's a guy who's for the most part has scored, at different levels. He was excellent in the USL in very different environment. Of course, we've seen with Canada, he's struggled a bit to translate. But what I love about this, funnily enough, the instant comparison I think of is this is a Moise Bombito-like transfer for him to Nice. And why I say that is he is heading to a big club, first and foremost. He's heading to a club that finished top 5 in La Liga last year, about to play in the Champions League. Like, he isn't dropping to some relegation fodder in La Liga. But he's not going to a club where I don't see a place for him. I call it the Moise Bombito transfer because when Bombito made that move to Nice, it made so much sense because they were selling Todibo for a lot of money to West Ham, and they decided, all right, here's this Canadian replacement, plug him in, boom. Villarreal has that opportunity because they made a lot of money last year selling Alex Baena to Atletico Madrid, but also Cherno Bari to Everton. The Bari one in particular is fascinating because it feels like Everton paid a little too much money. All of a sudden, Villarreal's got this money in their chest. The fact that they were willing to pay double their initial valuation for Tani Oluwaseyi, right? The first bid was rumored to be around $4 million, which we spoke about last week, was way too low. Now they've come in to that $8 million fee. I kind of speculated he'd probably be worth given past transfers out of MLS. It shows they really want the player and they have a hole to fill. So right away, that excites me because this isn't one of those haphazard transfers we see sometimes with big clubs in top 5 leagues, like with Conan at Marseille and some of the others where they just buy guys to stockpile. Villarreal is a bit more of a thriftier club in principle. So the fact that they're so willing to pursue a guy like this to fill a hole that's there in their roster makes me think he'll play. And now I think this is why Oluwaseyi's pushed for this move and why also Jesse Marsh endorsed this move in some of the media he's been doing this week.
I think the two things that worry me about a move like this for Tani Oluwaseyi is, first, he is a player that likes to play on the break. He likes to play in quick transition, and he's found the most success of his career so far on a Minnesota United team that tends to have less than 35% possession. And they did it again this weekend. They had 29% possession and beat the Seattle Sounders. And it was Joaquin Pereira scoring the goal, but Tani Oluwaseyi continued to play a big role. And I think that system really helps him. And I think you could look at, the potential rise of Eric Ramsey as a head coach. I think he's probably going to go off to England when his time finishes with Minnesota United. And maybe Tani Oluwaseyi is a player that he brings throughout his career. And I thought that could be the kind of move that Tani could take with this, club, and then translate that to the Canadian men's national team. And my worry number 2 is he goes and just, struggles right off the bat, isn't able to get in, and he loses his chance with the Canadian men's national team. And if he's in bad form, that is a striker that Canada doesn't have a ton of in that sort of characteristic and play style, that doesn't help the national team. If he's out of form, struggling for minutes, and suddenly you look at the Canadian striker pool and it's quite good, but there isn't that dynamic option that's different than the rest. Because you look at the other 4 strikers that were called up, they're all very similar-ish in their play style. There's not one that can like play on the break like Tani Oluwaseyi can, Brendan.
You don't think Promise David can do that though?
I think he can, but he hasn't necessarily proven it in that same level. That
I think he hasn't. Yeah, I think in Belgium and the way things have worked in Belgium, maybe he hasn't had to in the same sense that Tani has used all of his athletic traits to maximize his performances for Minnesota. And we've seen that translate when he comes in for a fatigued Kyle Larin, or a Larin who's not pressing and breaking the same way as he may have 5 or 6 years ago. I do think that it's a big gamble for Tani, because to your point about having a bad start, and like this is what's difficult with a team and why it matters whether if it's a team that's actually mid-table or a team that's pushing for a Champions League place and potentially, you know, in their minds up to Christmas, like trying to stay in contention for the league title. Right. It makes a big difference. And I think that, you know, Mallorca, it's a great comparison because Mallorca's on the other end where they would like to flirt with Europe, but they're also very conscious of relegation. So they almost tinker and tweak too much. Whereas when you are at the top, I do find you tinker and tweak like a little less. So if he does have some poor performances, he doesn't keep a place in the squad, like he may not get it back. So it does feel to me, I want to share in Alex's optimism, but I do think you lay out some great points about like why it's particularly difficult there. And I think I would feel better if he was maybe at somewhere else in Spain, but there is something about Spain that I'm just cautious of with Tani.
Again, to the point about minutes being available, I mentioned Tierno Bari going for 30 million euros. They also moved on 2 other center forwards this transfer window. One they sent to Belgium to Sint-Truiden. The other one they sent to Granada in La Liga 2 for change. Tani Oluwaseyi, as it stands, would be the lone striker that they've signed this window on a team that's about to rotate heavily in the Champions League. Again, that for me, looking at all that, minutes are not a concern at all, which again, this is why it feels like the Moise Bombito move at Nice, where immediately you saw like such a clear path towards minutes. The fit one's a great question because while, you know, Ben is right in the sense that we've only really seen Oluwaseyi thrive in that system, at the same time, players can be so much more than that. I think Oluwaseyi himself is probably not thrilled at times that he's in a system where he averages 30 touches per 90 minutes. It's a touch of the ball every 3 minutes of play. And I'd like to think if he was dropped into a system where he actually touched the ball more, given that he was, despite, again, touching the ball every 3 minutes, he's top 10 in MLS and non-penalty expected goals, expected assists, all those sorts of stats. And I think that's why, again, I wonder if Villarreal is also using this as a bit of a money ball of, okay, you got a guy who's thriving in this very different system. Yes, it might look unconventional to drop him into a system like this. Plus, it's not like he's joining a club in Villarreal. Like for a La Liga, like that circuit is very technical, very tactical. Mm-hmm. Villarreal were a team that played 4-4-2 last year, that they liked to hit on the break. That's why they brought in a guy like Buchanan. That's why they had guys like Nicolas Pepe. You know, why Baena was so devastating, because they knew how to play on the break, especially against big teams. It's not like Oluwaseyi is completely dropping into an alien world. So I think some of those tactical questions are a bit appeased, at least from my perspective. And at the same time, what we have to remember, these sorts of things are good for his development. I think it's good to see if Oluwaseyi can handle it. And that's why I liked, again, Jesse Marsh's comments to Josh Cloak in that interview. One of the things he pointed out is he wants to see Tani Oluwaseyi against low La Liga blocks, where to break it down, sometimes you have to have different movements, different ideas. And I think that's important to note, because Oluwaseyi, funnily enough, of the Canada strikers, he has one of the highest floors because of his athletic profile and how he presses, that even if he's out of form, I see more value in him because, you know, you can throw him on for the last 30 minutes. He's going to press his ass off and bring you some defensive value. Whereas some like a Promise David, for example, he if he's not scoring, what's he bringing you other than size, right? That's why there's genuine concerns Marcia's had with his fitness, with other things of the sort. So I think that's also something to consider with Oluwaseyi. I'm not as concerned about his form dropping just because of that aspect of his game as well.
Can we just make t-shirts, boys? Tani Tajon, because that's gonna be the super duo.
I like it. I think we could definitely get that happening once we get that NFP shop up and running.